It's March 15th, 44 BC, and the most powerful man in the Roman world is walking into the Senate house with no bodyguards. Within minutes, he will be surrounded by a group of men he trusted, men he had spared, promoted, even forgiven. One of them grabs his toga, another draws a dagger and cuts him in the neck. Then it's chaos. Knife after knife after knife, some of the conspirators so frantic they accidentally cut each other in the scramble to land a blow. By the time it's over, Julius Caesar has been stabbed 23 times by 60 different conspirators. A Roman physician would later examine the body and find that out of all those wounds, only one was actually fatal. This is the story of how the most brilliant man in Rome clawed his way to absolute power, and how the friends he trusted most became the men who killed him. Julius Caesar was not born into wealth or guaranteed power. His family, the Julii, were ancient nobility, but they were not rich, and they hadn't held real political influence in generations. Caesar's father died when he was just 16, leaving him as the head of the family with a famous name and almost nothing else. And then things got worse. Rome's most powerful man at the time, the dictator Sulla, ordered Caesar to divorce his wife because her father was Sulla's political enemy. Caesar refused. Sulla responded by stripping him of his inheritance and marking him for execution. Caesar fled Rome, narrowly escaping with his life, and joined the military in Asia Minor, where he would earn one of Rome's highest military honors for saving a fellow soldier's life in battle. It's a pattern that defines his entire career. Threatened, he doesn't fold. He runs toward danger and comes back stronger. Around this same period in his life, Caesar was captured by pirates and held for ransom in the Mediterranean. According to ancient accounts, he treated his captors less like captors and more like staff, reportedly joking that once he was free, he'd have them all executed. Nobody took him seriously. He was just a captive with nothing. Once the ransom was paid and he was released, Caesar raised a small fleet, hunted down the very pirates who had held him, and had them crucified, exactly as he'd promised. Even as a young man, this was a preview of who Caesar actually was: calm under pressure, dangerously patient, and someone who always made good on his word, for better or worse. When the dictator Sulla finally died, Caesar returned to Rome and started climbing. Not through inherited power, because he didn't have any, but through two things he was exceptionally good at: public speaking and reading what ordinary Romans actually wanted. While Rome's traditional aristocracy looked down on the common people, Caesar courted them directly. He spent enormous amounts of borrowed money on public games and spectacles. He took on legal cases that made him popular with everyday citizens. He was, by most accounts, charming, witty, and impossible to ignore in a room. By 60 BC, Caesar had built himself into someone worth allying with, so he made one of the most important political moves of his life. He partnered with two of the most powerful men in Rome: Crassus, the wealthiest man in the Republic, and Pompey, its most celebrated general. Together, the three of them formed what historians now call the First Triumvirate, an unofficial alliance that let them dominate Roman politics by combining money, military glory, and Caesar's growing popularity with the masses. It worked. Caesar was elected consul, the highest office in Rome, in 59 BC. And then, in 58 BC, he was given command of the provinces of Gaul, modern-day France. This is where Caesar transforms from a clever politician into a legend. Over the next 8 years, Caesar conquered the whole of Gaul. He pushed Roman territory all the way to the English Channel, even crossing into Britain itself, becoming one of the first Roman commanders to do so. His most famous victory came at the siege of Alesia in 52 BC, where he trapped the Gallic leader Vercingetorix and his army between Caesar's forces and a relief army arriving from outside, somehow defeating both simultaneously. Vercingetorix surrendered shortly after. The Gallic Wars made Caesar enormously wealthy, gave him an army of battle-hardened soldiers who were loyal to him personally rather than to Rome itself, and made him a celebrity back home. He wrote detailed accounts of his own campaigns and had them circulated throughout Rome, essentially running one of history's earliest and most effective PR campaigns. But fame and loyalty on this scale doesn't go unnoticed. Back in Rome, Pompey was growing nervous. Crassus had died fighting in the east, which meant the triumvirate was now down to 2 men, and only one Rome could fit at the top. The Senate, many of whom had never trusted Caesar to begin with, sided with Pompey. They ordered Caesar to disband his army and return to Rome alone, unarmed and without his legions. For Caesar, this was an impossible choice. Obey, and he'd be stripped of power, possibly exiled, possibly executed by his enemies the moment he was defenseless. Refuse, and he would be committing an act of treason against the Republic itself. In January of 49 BC, Caesar made his decision. He marched his army to the edge of a small river called the Rubicon, the legal boundary past which no general was allowed to bring troops into Roman territory. According to ancient sources, he paused there, weighing the consequences of what he was about to do. Then he crossed it anyway, reportedly saying, "The die is cast." There was no undoing this. The moment Caesar's army stepped over that river, Rome was at war with itself. The civil war that followed moved incredibly fast. Caesar's reputation for speed and his soldiers' fierce loyalty meant that town after town surrendered to him without a fight. Pompey, caught off guard by how quickly Caesar moved, fled Italy entirely. Caesar chased him across the Roman world, eventually crushing Pompey's forces at the Battle of Pharsalus in 48 BC, despite being significantly outnumbered. Pompey himself fled to Egypt, hoping for protection. Instead, he was murdered the moment he stepped onto Egyptian shores, by men hoping to win favor with Caesar. When Caesar arrived in Egypt shortly after, he didn't find an ally. He found a young queen named Cleopatra, fighting her own brother for the throne. Caesar backed her in that conflict. She won, and the two began a relationship that would shape Roman politics for the next 2 decades, though the two never married. By 46 BC, with his rivals dead or scattered, Caesar returned to Rome not just as a victorious general, but as its unquestioned master. The Senate, whether out of fear, exhaustion, or genuine belief he'd earned it, declared him dictator. 2 years later, in 44 BC, they went further still, naming him dictator for life, and this is where things start to unravel. Caesar used his power to genuinely reform Rome. He redistributed land to veterans and the poor, reformed the calendar into a version strikingly similar to the one the world still uses today, and expanded citizenship to people across the empire. By most measures, his actual policies were popular with everyday Romans. But the symbols of his power told a different story. His face appeared on Roman coins, the first time a living Roman had ever been honored that way. He was given the right to wear royal-style clothing and sit on a golden chair in the Senate. Statues of him went up in temples, usually reserved for gods. To a Senate built on the idea that Rome should never again be ruled by a king, this didn't look like gratitude toward a great leader. It looked like the slow rebirth of a monarchy, with Caesar as its first king in all but name. A group of senators, including men Caesar had personally spared and promoted after defeating them in the Civil War, began meeting in secret. Their leaders were Gaius Cassius, and most painfully for Caesar, Marcus Brutus, a man some ancient sources suggest Caesar may have cared for almost like a son. They called themselves the Liberators, and they convinced themselves that killing one man could save the Republic. On the morning of March 15th, 44 BC, a date Romans called the Ides of March, Caesar headed to a Senate meeting at the Theater of Pompey, ignoring warnings from friends and, according to legend, a soothsayer who had specifically told him to beware this exact day. What happened next took only minutes. Surrounded under the pretense of a petition, Caesar was attacked from all sides, stabbed by dozens of the very men he had trusted with his own safety. Some ancient accounts claim that when he saw Brutus among his attackers, he stopped resisting entirely. The conspirators believed that killing Caesar would restore the old republic. They were catastrophically wrong. His death didn't bring Rome back to how it used to be. It plunged the entire Roman world into another round of civil war, one that ended with Caesar's own adopted heir, a young man named Octavian, defeating the conspirators and eventually becoming Rome's very first emperor under a new name, Augustus. The republic that Brutus and Cassius killed Caesar to protect never came back. If anything, his assassination is what finally killed it for good. Julius Caesar's name still echoes through history in ways almost no other figure's does. The word for emperor in both German and Russian, Kaiser and Tsar, both come directly from his name. The month of July is named for him, and the phrase, crossing the Rubicon, is still used today, 2,000 years later, to describe any decision so big there's no turning back from it. He climbed from a family with a famous name and no money to the single most powerful man the ancient world had ever seen, and it took just one morning, surrounded by his own friends, to bring it all to an end. Every empire falls, and sometimes so does the man who built it.